Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this 8-week certificate course offered by SWAYAM MOOC on quantitative and mixed method research. I am happy to introduce myself, Professor Ravi Subudhi, presently working as a senior professor with the School of Management of KIT deemed to be University. I'll also be welcoming my colleague Professor Sumita Mishra. She is also a professor, and both of us will be listening to us through our lecture videos. Today we will be presenting the first session, that is session 1 of week 1. This will be on introduction to the research methodology and the basics of research. In this week 1 course, which is mostly introduction to research, we will be covering very briefly introduction, how to do a research, what we do in the research. We will be covering types of research and stages of research process. But let's have a quick view on the remaining weeks what we are supposed to cover. Week 2 will be covering identification of research problems. Third week we are covering research design and sampling design. Week 4 will be devoted on measurement scales and data collection methods. Week 5 we are going to cover interesting concepts of hypothesis and hypothesis testing. Week 6 is on data analysis techniques, and we will be covering again the same thing as part 2 on week 7 also. As a special feature of this particular course, we are having a mini research project. Me and my colleague Professor Sumita will be discussing on the details of the mini research project and the evaluation for this particular project. Now let's start as part of the session 1 of week 1, why we do research, particularly the research in management and social sciences field. In this brief video, we are trying to discuss, understand and explain through illustrations why we do research, how to do research and different basic concepts of research. I'll be particularly introducing this particular course and also the research which should be undertaken as self-motivated, self-satisfying, and this research should be for knowledge creation. It should add to the knowledge base what we have already knowing. So let's try to understand why you do research. The main goal of any research is to increase the knowledge base, the exact stock of the knowledge what is available in the existing literature. And in research, the researchers are meant to solve some societal problems which they might have identified, and that increases the knowledge base which was not there earlier. Researches are primarily done for two things. We are solving something social or managerial problem which we will be calling as applied research, or alternatively we may be devoting a research for idea generation, and that type of research we will be calling latter is theoretical research or basic research. In social science research, as we get inputs mostly as part of opinion or feedback from some diverse respondents or the interviewees, so we can understand that the inputs or the feedback could vary immensely and it would be very diverse opinion. So in this context, we should also understand the research paradigms. Briefly, a paradigm can be defined as a way of viewing the world. A research paradigm is a set of common beliefs and agreements shared among the experts how about problems should be understood and addressed. These research paradigms will be again discussed by my colleague Professor Sumita. Now we will be discussing some of the basic concepts of the research. Let's first try to understand and define what we understand by research. Research can be defined as some investigation or search for knowledge or to establish novel facts, newer facts, to solve problems or to generate new ideas or new theories. But we should not forget, every time we will be using some scientific method or other. Research can have a set of techniques and principles for systematically collecting, recording and analyzing, and then finally meaningful interpretation of data. Now we must not forget that when you are doing research, the research should be very interesting and it should be memorable for the part of the researcher, and finally the end result should be publishable. Publishable means whatever result, whatever research we have done, it is appreciated by the journal editor and also the reviewer. Now, how to start a good research? I think you will agree with me, a good research starts with a good research topic. Then how to get a good research topic? Usually either a research topic is given or decided, which can include some problem solving research, or it could be self-driven. Then we select the interesting topics by ourselves. How do we select the topics? To me, I think we need to understand the current trend. For that, we will be referring literature, research articles, or we might observe day-to-day happening, or we get some guided ideas or insights from the peer. So what I can suggest, as budding researcher, we all should study some of the latest trends. Maybe we must refer regularly research journals, news magazines and conference themes. How to get ideas? As we were discussing, maybe we have to be updated with the latest trend, we have to refer the research journals, we have to refer the news magazines. We could look for theoretical topic, for theoretical research and for applied research. Let us take some of the examples. One, when we are thinking comparison of boys and girls, can we say, are girls more caring? If this is so, can we also say, if girls can make better choice for front office job or for customer relationship management jobs? One more example, when you are talking of the duration of the topic, duration of the teaching, how it is going to impact the teaching learning. Should it be less, should it be more, or what should be the ideal timing? It could be part of a research. And when we see the varying IQ of the children in any school, we see diverse children when you talk of the IQ differences among them. Has it anything to do with parental care? What I am just suggesting, can it be a part of social research when parental care could be part of a study which might impact the children's psychological development? Let's take one more example which will be illustrating later in detail regarding the employment and the retirement. If a person retires early, what happens? If a person retires late, what happens? Is it leading to the health hazards? How it is perhaps impacting the early or later death? We'll be discussing it later. Now let us first discuss the types of research in this tabular form. As you can see from the exhibit, in one way we can classify research into basic research or applied research. In another angle, we can classify research as exploratory research, where we do not have much earlier insight, or conclusive research if we have some insights or inputs. From among the conclusive research, we can classify conclusive research as either descriptive research or causal research. We'll be giving an example of causal research in the next slide. In causal research, actually, what we are going to study, the cause and effect of two related factors. Now, before we illustrate one example of a causal research, let's first try to understand the possible stages of research. In a structured way, in any research, this could be the following steps or stages of research. First, to start a research, we need to have the clear-cut idea about the research issue or the research objective. It must be defined clearly, and we have to identify the research problem. Once it is identified or defined, we have to identify if we will be needing the data, what type of data, and we have to need the data sources from where we will be collecting the data. Next step, third step will be the research design and data collection method. Then we will be going for a sample design where we have to identify the sample from among the target population. Once your sample design is ready, sample is selected, then we go for data collection. We will be discussing in detail different types of data collection. Once you have collected data, then we compile, analyze and interpret the data. First, we have identified the problem, then we are talking of the data needs. For data, we are deciding from where to collect data. There, we are talking of the target population in one side and the sample we are going to select from that particular target population. Once you are ready with your sample, then we are collecting data from that sample. Then once you are ready with your data, which we will be calling primary data mostly, you can also use secondary data, then we go for data analysis. Once your analysis is done, final stage is the research finding and report writing. Now, the example I was talking of on the causal research, it could also be example of conclusive research, it could also be example of applied research. This is a case which was published in one health magazine report. It illustrates how the employees face tremendous pressure during their work life, and that might lead to the health hazards if one continues working beyond 60 years, how it is going to impact the health condition. And a researcher had studied how the employment duration or retirement age and the age of death, whether there is any causal relation between the two. Let's see this data which is shown in the PPT. First column is about the different retirement of different employees. Second column, the respective age of death, and the study here is to relate these two factors. One, retirement age, second, the age of death. As you can please mark from the table, if retirement age is increasing, the age of death is decreasing. This type of relation in statistics we call a negative or inverse relation. So from this we can conclude that if one retires lately, might be, as per this result, that one might die young. So this is a finding part of the causal research. Now here what we can refer back about the stages of research. First we have got research objective, then this data what you have collected as the primary data from a sample, and it is from the target population of those retired persons and those who really died at different ages, and this data analysis finding is really part of the causal research. Now let's see these two factors. First factor, retirement age, second factor, age of death. Usually in research we take as X and Y. These two factors, they have got synonyms. We will be discussing again detail about these factors and the meanings and the concept, but let me briefly introduce. The first factor X is also called as independent variable, Y is traditionally called dependent variable. These two are also called antecedent and consequence, and also we can call it predictor and criterion. That means the retirement age predicts, affects the age of death, which is our criterion or dependent variable. We used in this example some quantitative data to verify possible causal relationship as part of the research. We shall next have a brief discussion on the data concepts. Data is really very important, it is very critical, and we can say this is actually the building blocks of research. We must be very clear what is the requirement or the needs of data for any research. We should also answer if a researcher will really need data and why we should need data. If you are convinced, then what type of data? If you are very clear the type of data, we will be discussing later the classification of data, then we will be trying to understand what could be the source of those data. We will be discussing step by step in the weeks to come, and we will also be classifying different data collection methods. When you are collecting data, we are collecting data for different variables that we discuss, and we are using some scales of measurement which we will be discussing covering in one separate lecture video. So different research methods are there. We have given one exhibit only, one illustration only. In the next week, we will be having a detailed discussion on data sources, how to decide, identify the data source. It could be starting with the target population. From the target population, we will be defining a representative small portion that is called sample. Then a population could be a finite population or infinite population. We will have different examples, and this could also be countable or uncountable. And we may be using some secondary databases. Even some research will have some challenge of dealing with some rare sampling units. We will be discussing separately the concept of outliers, which is really very interesting research, and the concept of survivor bias. So thanks for listening with a lot of patience, and you will be reading the reading material where we will be giving you some questions. Please read the supplementary reading material. Try to answer the weekly test questions which will be evaluated by my colleagues. Thank you. Bye-bye.